Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast, where hope matters. I'm Jimmy Hinton.
And I'm Clara Hinton, and we're so glad that you've joined us.
If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of our podcast. Today we're going to talk about how socially skilled abusers are. This is something that's kind of interesting, and we're going to talk a lot about perspective, because what a lot of researchers don't realize, and these are people who work with sex offenders and victims of abuse, but what they don't realize is that out here, what I call in the real world, right. Where we reside, right. Things look a lot differently. Our perspective is a lot different than somebody who's sitting across the table from either a victim in a counseling session or as they're forensically interviewing victims, or sitting across the table from somebody who's been incarcerated. When you know that they're an abuser and you have police reports sitting in front of you, and you have data that tells you that these people are guilty of a crime. So you already know that, and that automatically changes your perspective. And so people who are entrenched in the professional field, they have a completely different perspective. In fact, you and I have a different perspective now than we did 7 years ago.
Absolutely. We've dealt personally with a pedophile. Mm-hmm. So, of course, we have a different perspective than someone who has not been in that capacity. So, and what you're saying, Jimmy, is that the data that, say, a counselor has or a corrections officer at a prison, they have that information in front of them. They know they are speaking to either a victim mm-hmm. or a pedophile. Therefore, they've formed that opinion based on that data that they have.
Yeah.
But when Joe Smith on the street is walking down the street and talking to, say someone like your dad, mm-hmm. And knows your dad or knew your dad in a very casual way, they're not going to be thinking, boop, 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 neon sign going off.
Right.
There's something wrong. There's not at all.
Right. So the problem that I have with this is, and I had sent you an article yesterday from our local news station. And what it was, it said, in light of this being Abuse Prevention Month, or Abuse Awareness Month, we just want to remind you that if you see something, say something. It was reminding people that you don't have to be a mandated reporter to report abuse. And if you see the quote unquote signs of abuse, make sure you pick up the phone and you report it.
Right.
What was interesting was I creeped on the comments section, and I didn't find a single positive comment from people who are out here in the real world. And they said, it doesn't work that way.
It does not work that way. And I think that's what we need to bring to our listeners today mm-hmm. as to why it doesn't work that way.
Yep.
It's frustrating beyond the word frustrating.
Yeah. And the other beef that I have, and I harp on this a lot when I go speak places, is that people who are in the professional community. Now, this is a generalization, and I know that, but for the most part, people in the professional community who harp on this, if you see something, say something, they cloak that in under the umbrella of prevention. Well, reporting abuse is not prevention unless you're really going to stretch it and say, when you lock somebody up who's been abusing for years or even decades, you're right. preventing further abuse from that person.
Right.
Okay, I'll grant you that, but reporting is not prevention. Reporting is damage control at best.
Right. And I think when we say, you are mandated to report, that it gives a person or gives people a sense of, I'm doing what I should be doing because I saw this child and the child was full of bruises. Well, that's after the fact, and it's great, like you said, that has been reported. That
it has to be. No, absolutely, it has to be reported.
But for the child who's living in a home where there's sexual abuse going on, either in the home or by, say, a grandfather or by, neighbor, whatever, how do we report that when we haven't seen it?
Right.
And that's what you're talking about today.
Yeah, and we legitimately don't see that. And if you've not watched the first video, and the second will be up soon, I still am running into some editing issues with video number 2. But go onto my website or Mom's website, and you can read my most recent blog post and your most recent blog post.
Right.
And we have the video from, I guess it's been 2 weeks ago now, with neuroscientists Dr. Machnick and Dr. Martinez Conde. It is phenomenal. And it is really
it truly
eye-opening.
It's opened a lot of eyes, and it's opened a new door as to how we deal with this thing called prevention, how we can deal with it. And it's going to take a couple sessions of us talking to even get the initial ideas across here.
So all that to say that this podcast may leave you frustrated. Because we're not providing answers for what you can actually do in this episode. So right now, this episode, we're just talking about why telling people, oh, if you see something, just report it. Why that's superficial. That's absolutely superficial, and it just doesn't work that way.
Right. Not in the world of child sex abuse.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And even domestic, domestic abuse is the same thing.
Absolutely true.
Extend that to neglect. All kinds of areas. It just typically it doesn't work that way, where you see these obvious signs and then and even when you do see them, you're just like, oh goodness, I need to pick up the phone and report it. It just doesn't work that way. So we'll explain why. Number one, abusers are not suspected because they're loved. They're kind, they're compassionate, at least in public. They're kind, they're compassionate, they're giving. And I will emphasize this, they are normal. Everybody sees them. Everybody's drawn to them. They see them as this normal, high-functioning, fun,
often quite intelligent.
Intelligent person that's just fun to be around. And, all the stuff that says with pedophiles that, they migrate to kids and they don't have normal adult relationships, and
they have this creepy look, and you picture them hiding behind the bushes. And right. Jimmy, I was cleaning out a closet this past weekend, and in a bag I had put all of the newspapers from when your dad was arrested. And I sat on the floor and pulled them out, laid them out, and there are front page pictures of your dad with big 2-inch letters, molester, arrested. And then they show his picture, and I thought, when you look at that picture, you don't think molester at all. You think, in fact, he looks pitiful, in that he looks sad and, just kind. Just the picture doesn't portray the real person at all. And of course, he was my husband for close to 40 years. And even knowing what he did, if I just looked at that picture, it doesn't fit the description that most people tell us to look for. There weren't creepy signs.
But then take that a step further. Take not just the picture, but take the person. The person who's literally sitting across from you, and you have absolutely no context to even even suspect that this person is capable of abuse. You'd
Right.
never think it.
You
We
would
never
not.
thought it with
No,
him.
No, not at all. And people ask me all the time, and I know they ask you, well, how could your dad, we never would dream he was like this.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, he was kind. He really, truly was. He served people. He visited nursing homes. He took you kids with him and taught you how to make hospital visits. And he taught you respect. He, he was extremely respectful to elderly people, to all people, actually. He was funny. He told the funniest jokes. Never a dirty joke. They were clean jokes. He was fun, camping and, anything you could think of. He made it fun. He was just nice to be around.
Well, that's what I wanted to share some stories about him. And I'll put a little plug in because, I've actually been disciplining myself, waking up in the wee hours of the morning. I am writing my first book.
Which is no little undertaking.
Nope. And because you have multiple books.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, a lot of discipline. But in writing that, I just finished a chapter called My Childhood Hero. And I was recounting all these stories where every memory that I have of him from my childhood was a positive memory. I don't have a bad memory.
No.
I don't have and that's not because I was a kid and I was innocent and I was naive. He was genuinely a good, fun dad. And so I was sharing some of the stories, and I'll share a couple here, but just, going on vacations, he would take, all my brothers, minus the youngest, cause he was too young at the time. But, the oldest is a girl, and then there's 5 boys in a row. So it was Mike, Joe, Tim, Chris, and myself.
Right.
So I was the youngest in that string of boys. And so he would split vacations up and take us boys once a year to the beach. And man, I have some of the absolute most fondest memories. And as I was writing this chapter in the book, it was amazing, the flood of memories that were coming back. And I had to stop myself because it messes with you. And I finished that chapter by saying, I wish that I would have bad memories of him, because that would help me process the evil that he was capable of, and that he did, on dozens and dozens of little children.
I often think of you kids and how hard it has to be, how terribly hard it has to be to know your dad is sitting in prison, serving what we call a life sentence of, 30 years plus. But he was also this person who could be dubbed as the greatest dad on earth, because he was. He was, I always thought that. I felt less than a good mother because I was the one that lost my patience with you kids. I was the one who would fly off the handle and yell and scream and, go on my tirades. I was the frustrated mother. He was not. He was the calm father. He was the father who came home at the end of the day and was just calm, and you knew every day that's what he would be. And he spent time with you kids. He did take you on those marvelous vacations. He worked hard to plan every detail of them. He wanted you to have the best
as a parent
time
now,
ever.
absolutely. As a parent now, we've been planning a vacation, and we don't do them every year because it's exhausting, quite frankly.
It is, and expensive, exhausting.
It's expensive,
and terribly expensive.
So planning. And my wife, she's a planner. She is very organized. She's a good planner. And we were getting frustrated just this last week because we were like, man, here we are. We were hoping to have this thing planned in February. It's now pushing the end of April. And we don't have a clue where we're going or what we're doing.
But your dad, he let you kids choose. Where do you want to stay? What do you want to eat?
Yeah.
He was that father who made sure that you kids.
And they were magical. Our vacations were magical.
They were. And, but not just vacations. I mean, I'm thinking of camping trips you took with him, church retreats, things, all those things that other kids would look at you kids, and parents would say to me, man, your kids are so fortunate. They're so blessed. My husband doesn't spend time with the kids. I have to beg him to. They would come to me, whereas your dad was he was that person that other kids wish their dads was.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was proper English that I just used just that. Sorry about that. But it rips at my heart to think how terribly difficult that is for all of you to imagine your dad now sitting in prison and to think of the other side of your father, who was not this kind, generous person, but who intentionally harmed children. Just as intentional as he planned your wonderful times, he also intentionally harmed children.
Yeah, and I want people to realize the gravity of this, because keep in mind, as I write this, and this is almost 7 years removed, and I've looked at actual records. I punished myself because I just had to know. And so I actually looked at public records and and have spoken to victims of his. And so I know what he did, and it's bad. I mean, it's really, really, really bad. And traumatized. Right. I was traumatized just by hearing it.
Sure.
And I can't imagine what his victims, just the multiple layers of trauma that they experienced,
because
being abused at the hands of him.
Knew he, as far as we know, we don't know of the multitude of victims he probably had, but the ones that we are sure of were people who knew him. Yeah. Children who knew him.
Yeah.
And, I can't imagine either the layers of trauma because they knew this kind, gentle, fun, giving, delicate, I'll call, person who was aware of their feelings and what they needed, and then he molested them.
This is what I want. What I want our listeners to understand. We've had almost 7 years now of hard processing and revelations, and talking to detectives, and digging into records, and I have 7 years of communication with him back and forth via letter.
Right.
We've written. I just received a letter yesterday from him. Right. I still communicate with him. I've had 7 years of processing, and I still to this day in 2018 have a very difficult time merging the realities of how good and fun and awesome he was as a dad and as a person and as a contributor to society, versus the evil that he not only was capable of, but that he actually carried through with. Hundreds and thousands of times he followed through with it and actually did it. He didn't just think it with these children. He did it. And I can't merge those realities now with him sitting behind bars for the rest of his life. Now,
that's why
imagine the context of out in the real world. Before any allegations came forward, how could we know?
It's beyond our imagination, beyond our thinking, out of our realm. I think that's why I sat on the floor on Saturday just looking at those newspapers, rereading it. I have to read it to believe it. I had to be in the courtroom to hear him stand before the judge and say, yes, I did molest those children. I remember telling you, Jimmy, I have to be there.
Yeah, I remember us talking about that.
I have to hear it to believe it.
Yep. We both talked about that before going to his sentencing, and we both agreed we have to be here to hear it with our own ears.
That was probably the most horrible minute I've ever lived through. To hear that, to see him stand up and say yes.
And that was hard too, because that was the first time that we had seen him. He was shackled,
that was terrible.
And that messes with you too. And it's just. It's really difficult to process all this. And that's, again, with the context of him being arrested and behind bars. So when we hear this stuff, well, if you see these signs, just report it. And it's like it rolls off their tongue. There were no signs
to see. Right.
Yeah.
There were
no
signs.
There were, but our context didn't allow us to see it.
Right. And that's what's so difficult, I think, for us, as well as just everyone listening. I'm sure everyone is thinking, well, what did you see? What should you have seen?
Yeah.
And we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that starting next week, because I think that's vital. It's really important. And I think it is fairly easy to spot abusers, to pick them out of a crowd. With that being said, there are some major barriers that you have to overcome, and there's some off-the-charts self-awareness that you have to have, so that you realize where our blind spots are and how narrative shapes our not just perception of who people are, but it shapes our reality. And that was something, doctors
really hard. Yeah.
Doctors Macknick and Martinez Conde talked about that too. And, they said narrative is incredibly important for magicians. They use narrative. It's not just about going up there and doing sleight of hand tricks. Narrative is probably one of the most important components that they have.
And I think as you're explaining this, Jimmy, that we need to reference them back to your website to watch the video.
It's a must see.
Understand
it is a must
what you're
see.
Talking about when you're referencing the mind and how magicians work in conjunction with pedophiles.
Yeah.
So
I showed Mom this video, and we'll wind it down here. But I had showed her a video right before we started this podcast, and it's a State Farm commercial. And I'd never seen it before, but somebody at church referenced that last night. And it's this girl that she comes out and she says, "Wow, is that my car?" Because her dad bought her a brand new car and it's sitting in the driveway. Well, then another guy comes out, the screen changes, and it's another guy who's on the cell phone. He comes up and his car is on cinder blocks and his wheels are gone and it's been stripped. And he says, "Wow, is that my car?" And so it just goes through, and the narrative is exactly identical throughout the whole video. And
however, the scenes are two exactly opposite scenes.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, because I told Mom, I was like, if you closed your eyes and you didn't have the visual and you just had the narrative, you would never know that these were two diametrically opposed scenes, where one's just this joyful, the brand new car, it's a gift from Dad, and the other who's it's the guy whose car has been completely stripped bare. And they at the end they both wind up and they walk out of State Farm, and she says, "Wow, what a day." And he walks out and he says, "Wow, what a day."
Right.
And I just thought it was really telling, because context is everything. And out here, prior to people being arrested, our reality of abusers, who actually are abusers, our reality is shaped by narrative. And so the context that we have doesn't give us any indicator or any reason to believe that these guys would be abusing kids.
Right.
And so the whole, well, if you see something, if you see these signs of abuse, just report it. I'm telling you, it doesn't work that way. No. It doesn't work that way.
And I think you and I have driven ourselves almost to the point of being crazy with, why did we not see? Why did we not see something?
Yeah. That haunted me. Yeah. For a long time, it haunted me.
it has bothered me so badly that I've lost a lot of sleep over it.
Yeah.
How can I live with a person and not see this?
Mm-hmm. But I think, it's easy for me now to get frustrated with churches, though, who there are blatant signs of abuse that I see. And I'm like, you guys need to report this. And they come back and they're like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And I get so frustrated, but I have to remind myself that they're living in a context where they don't have reason to believe that this person is an abuser. And I, now I'm living in a context where I'm suspect of everybody.
Your eyes have been opened, though.
Yeah.
Your eyes have been educated. Your ears and eyes know.
Yeah.
So that's why we're here, helping others to understand better.
Yeah. So I'll close with this, and I'll say there's one thing that is just crystal clear with all abusers, and that is that they constantly lie. And so I will say that there is that indicator that as they're developing this narrative and they're controlling narrative and they're kind of stringing you along, start looking for subtle lies or mistruths or exaggerations, because a lie is a lie. At the end of the day, a lie is a lie. And when I go back and I remember things, and my wife has pointed this out. She pointed it out very, very early on with my dad. She said, your dad's very dishonest. He's a dishonest man. And she never liked him because...
It was weird, Jimmy.
I never saw it.
They were little lies, though.
Yeah.
I'm going to refer to the...
So insignificant.
Grape jelly. He would cook and put grape jelly in everything. And we would all ask him, if you remember that, did you use grape jelly in this? No. Yes, he did. Half the jar was missing.
Yeah.
He would use grape jelly. But it's a little lie, but it's a tricky lie.
Yeah.
He was doing something so subtly, and you can say, what's a grape jelly have to do with a pedophile? It's the lies, feeding the lie. And then you are asking yourself, am I nuts? Am I crazy? Or did he use that grape jelly? And, that's just one example.
Yeah, no, that's a good example because because I don't want people to hear that, these are like big, boisterous lies that they're just little, tiny, subtle lies that you walk away and you're like, did he really just say that?
He spilled Clorox on the carpet in our bedroom. It's a red carpet, and Clorox bleached out this whole line. And I remember asking him, what did you do? What? He said, nothing. I said, what were you doing with Clorox here on the carpet? Nothing. And he never would admit that he did that. Yeah, there was the Clorox bottle. There were his socks that had Clorox on them. He never would. And it left me thinking, well, I wonder if one of the kids came in and had his socks on or were No, it was him.
Yeah. But I can remember like certain sermons where he would give sermon illustrations and he would tell a truthful story, something that actually did happen, but he would change like one minor detail in that story that wasn't true at all.
Right.
And he would embellish the story, but not like where it was this grandiose story that was unbelievable. It was a truthful story, but he would always just interject one little lie in there.
Weave that lie in.
But it wasn't enough where you would even call him on it.
No, but you'd question yourself. I don't remember it that way.
Yeah.
You would be thinking, I don't know if I remember that quite that way.
Yeah.
And I think those lies are made to make us question ourselves.
I think too, and I think part of that is practicing. They practice everything. And so, and Dad he's written about this in letters, but he talks about their ability to lie. And he said, if you think that looking somebody in the eye is going to intimidate them and somehow make you realize when they're being deceptive, he said, you're sadly mistaken. Right. He said, I can tell you anything. He said, anything and look you square in the eye, and I can be lying through my teeth and you'd never know it.
Right.
And that's
So what's the
That's
truth
truthful.
bomb again?
Yeah, so the truth bomb is to learn to look beyond the kindness in people and listen for those subtle lies. And then document. Write them down. We never did that. Well, you probably did through journaling.
I did.
But it wasn't intentionally. It wasn't intentionally like, I'm going to write down and document the lies.
No, I was questioning myself, questioning my sanity. The last couple of years we were together, I questioned my very sanity because of this.
So I would say document how many lies are told in a day, how many lies are told in a week, and how many are told in a month, and what those specific lies are. Because that begins to paint a picture where you begin to see this person in a different light. Deception is deception is deception is deception. Lies are lies. Document. Even if you think you're being totally stupid and you think you're just, you feel like you're on a witch hunt. If somebody's lying to you, document those lies, write them down. I wish we would have done that.
You're right. Right.
Well, we're going to end there. Thank you again for listening to this episode of our podcast, and we will catch you next time. As always, thank you for tuning in to the Speaking Out on Abuse podcast with Jimmy and Clara Hinton. You can subscribe to the podcast through either of our websites, findingahealingplace.com, jimmyhinton.org, or through iTunes. Please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode.